Gentlemen, the Banking Clan and Trade Federation are about business, not violence. With or without Senator Amidala, the Galactic Senate is unlikely to deregulate the banks until this war hits home.
What's up, men and nerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the Muun species, by far one of the most influential species in the entire galaxy, covering everything from biology to culture and history. I'm sure you'll learn something new. So if you want to promote actual Star Wars lore here on YouTube, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos. But let's get into it. The Muuns were tall and gaunt humanoids with thin bodies and elongated, hairless heads, standing an average of 1.9 meters or 6 feet 3 inches, with little apparent difference between the sexes. Their skin was pasty white or pale pink to gray, most likely because the vast majority of the species did not like traveling, even on planet, and usually stayed indoors. They had tiny ears in the middle of the sides of their heads, and these long humped noses and slim mouths. Their voices often sound nasal due to their narrow and long noses. Notice that their first 2 fingers are very long, while the next 2 are abruptly stubby. But their most interesting biological feature is that they have 3 hearts, 1 normal heart, and 2 that they could consciously control, a trait often used to increase blood flow in low temperatures. And this also may have contributed to a longer lifespan, and something that Darth Plagueis would use from everything from his cardio, having better stamina in combat, to staying calm in tense situations and surviving in extreme temperatures. One aspect nobody likes to talk about is that the creator definitely intended for certain species to have what would be most simply described as higher IQs. The details on these people are very clear, that if there was a sort of standardized interspecies IQ test, the Muuns as a group would score higher than most species out there. The simplest way to think of it is that the humans would be the norm, the baseline 100, as species lore is usually just a reference to if they are usually smarter or dumber than the average human. But though the Muuns would be quite happy to brag about that, and most species in the galaxy would also notice that they were usually far more greedy and cautious than other people. They lived for over 100 years, not Wookiee levels but longer than most, and when combined with this intelligence, cautiousness, and greed, it all made them excellent at long-term financial planning. They often frustrated other species by being too analytical or slow to act, and there was a common vicious downward spiral of interspecies relations, where the alien would feel like the Muun was trying to outsmart or trick them, being somehow hiding something and stalling in order to manipulate the deal, when in reality it could just be their slow-moving, check everything 1,000 times way of thinking. But also, of course, as their networks grew, this did become a real tactic used to frustrate those on the other side of the table. But people often overlooked how coldly logical it all was to most Muuns. Even their language was best compared to a kind of computer code. Muun language is based off of a binary code of and sounds, and there were pairs of varying pitch patterns for further details. And so combining all this together gives you all sorts of rich meaning, just like any other language. But sociologists said that it was most like binary flash code, which is a droid language. There is something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis or linguistic relativity, which suggests that the structure of a language influences its speakers' worldviews and cognitive processes. It can range from everything from Russians having more distinct words for blue than English, and so Russian speakers can more quickly identify shades of blue colors. Languages with grammatical gender like Spanish, French, and German often influence how speakers perceive objects. For example, the word bridge is masculine, el puente, in Spanish, and feminine, de brücke, in German. And so in Spanish, it's common to describe bridges using traditionally masculine adjectives like strong, while German speakers may use more feminine attributes like elegant. English has a strong focus on time, like I went or I will go, and some believe that what are called futureless languages, not that they don't have the concept at all, but ones that don't emphasize this as much, like seen with Chinese languages, seem tied to reducing concepts of the future being some far-off and distant thing from today. Linguistically, it's not as distinctly separated, and so some researchers believe they found a connection to the people who speak these languages being more likely to save money and plan for the long term, as the future feels more connected to the present. While there's also things like counting systems and ownership, the Paraha is a native language in Brazil, and it doesn't have possessive words like mine, nor distinct words for 1, 2, and 3, instead just having the vague few and many, which is about as opposite as you can get from something like Sumerian, which evolved out of trade ledgers, keeping track of ownership and precise amounts. And so you can see how the language itself will shape how one contextualizes their role in the world. And so eventually we see that their civilizations will look incredibly different over the years. It raises the question of the chicken and the egg and why so many people conceptualize language as something given by the gods, because it gets to the core of consciousness, seeming to pop into our minds, not something generated by us, when people are hit with the inspiration that led to concepts that became speech and words. And so I say all that to say that the Muuns have everything going from their biology to their actual language, and thus the framework of their culture and minds was closer to something like a calculating computer. And so when members of this species started getting into galactic trade, with the solidifying of Republic control over the galaxy, you quickly see them start to dominate banking, seeing it as the core or the base code of all trade. This was happening in the very early history of these people, with few details on their evolution or pre-space travel civilization. All we know is that they originally come from the planet Scipio, at grid coordinates K5 in the Outer Rim. The Muun people used to be distinct bands of fiercely fighting warriors, something that is still seen in the clothing style that mimics the look of their primitive armor. And they used to be heavily tattooed warriors as well. So though they are frail-looking, lanky bankers now, they were once armored tattoo warrior bands like Scythians or Vikings in constant warfare with their neighbors. The tats were abandoned, but many species felt like they were still on the receiving end of ruthless raiding people, if in a more bureaucratic and polite form, with plush offices and paperwork. As overlooking the snow-covered mountain ranges and valleys, looming over the countless graveyards of their warrior ancestors, the spires of the InterGalactic Banking Clan maintain the financial code of the galaxy. But first, let's thank our partners over at Geeky Grotto, who are having another 10% off sale on their already great low prices. As you can see, I already have a ton of their stuff. It's really high-quality builds that are compatible with Legos, and I'm really excited to get to building these. MOC Builds usually give you access to all sorts of builds that you can't get anywhere else, and they all come with free shipping to the United States. Check out the site, it really is fun to see all these amazing designs. From space fighters to pirate ships, real-world models, kawaii tabletop decor and anime, to military builds and all kinds of parts you need, like motors, loose bricks, lights, plates, and roads. Pew pew! I really love my Geeky Grotto builds, all kinds of neat stuff. I'm sure you'll like something. Check them out using the link down below for an additional 10% off. Thanks again to Geeky Grotto. But interestingly, there was not just a pure digital code or system where money could be created out of thin air, kind of like what we have.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally, so we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally.
It seems that they never had an event like the US coming off the gold standard. All money traded in the galaxy far, far away, from everything I can tell, is still backed by real precious metals stored somewhere. One of the most clear examples of this was in the final years of the Empire, where some people were fearing a collapse, and they moved off the digital or token currency in favor of credit chits and cubes, which themselves contained material equal to the trade value, like how coins always used to work. So these forms of money all had intrinsic value, and even when times were good and people just wanted to digitally move money around or use tokens in a role like paper money, it was still more like US paper money when we were still in the gold standard, when you could take that piece of paper and exchange it for gold. There really were vaults of material that backed the printed or digitally represented money, and the most important of these vaults was on Scipio. I was confused at first at how to reconcile this with Watto's famous statement,
"Republic credits are no good out here, I need something more real."
So how could it be that the credits themselves were actually valuable? I think that what Qui-Gon has here is the equivalent of those old gold-backed $100 bills, where these really do represent something, but good luck finding a vendor that would actually be able to turn them into that gold in hand way out there in the Outer Rim. Something like if there was no bank around and you had to cash a check. So all that backed the Republic credits were stored in enormous vaults ruled by the Core 5, which arose naturally from the 5 financial moguls that came to dominate banking, but over time became a codified position in the official government. In fact, this banking leadership is the only mention of government we get on Scipio, but their early colony Munist is described as being run by the United Clans. So likely a form of representative leadership, at least in the form of the clan leaders that make the decisions together. How one gets to become the leader of their clan is unknown, but given most of their other cultural details, I think it's more hereditary, and if democratic in any way, it may be that the elites are picking from a very small pool of candidates. Something like the patriarchs of a certain family, maybe picking a handful of their top kids to choose from. And to be honest, this wasn't too different from even the high morality of the Republic. And almost everyone did recognize certain positive traits in the Muuns. They valued tradition and built a society focused on merit and intelligence, leading to a very effective and prosperous, if class-based structure. In this hierarchy, financiers, lawyers, engineers, and diplomats were the most respected, where common citizens rarely ventured off-planet due to limited upward mobility, but it's said that no one was living in squalor like something you see in the underworld of Coruscant. Only the most gifted children who passed demanding exams could move up in status, and with fierce competition among colleagues boosting economic growth, productivity, and strong work ethics. Their exceptional skills with money came from their highly developed mathematical and statistical abilities, and it's said that Muun children could solve complex equations as quickly as adults of other species. They often considered other species immature and felt justified in exploiting them when necessary. This competitive nature drove their success both with other races and among themselves, leading to an increased economic output wherever they were present. Which is why even when other species felt that the Muuns were looking down their long noses at them, their effectiveness was just undeniable. And as long as you were allied with them, your civilization would probably prosper as well. At least financially and materially. And though of course they have a focus on profit, Muuns respected fairness and justice, viewing contracts as almost sacred, and adhering to the letter of the law, even if not always the spirit of the law. There's another detail that people often overlook is that they are the not the intra-galactic banking clan, meaning they traded outside of the galaxy too. It's something we never really see in Star Wars, with the closest thing being Kamino, originally stated as being outside the galaxy. And this quick shot is all we get of the smaller satellite galaxies that we know that they worked with. We do not get details on their civilization before 25,200 BBY, but that year marks the end of the Infinite Empire and their freedom from their Rakatan overlords. After leaving their home planet Scipio, they made a relatively short trip over to the next grid coordinate on the map to colonize Munist. Their economy initially revolved around farming and fishing, but this changed with the establishment of trade routes that connected the outer rim to the core, and they discovered that their colony world was home to vast amounts of precious metals. Throughout this era of the Galactic Republic, Munist was known for funding lucrative ventures within its sector, often without regard for ethics or loyalty. Just a more obvious form of what was happening on Coruscant, and they quickly became an economic competitor to the Ecumenopolis. Munist even financed the human colony of Sartanayanin, which, despite Munist's support, or maybe because of it, this world later left the Republic due to anti-alien sentiments. The banking clans of Munist ignored such biases, focusing solely on profits. They funded various colonies, trade guilds, and corporations along the Braxant Run. Over time, the Muuns also expanded to colonize Megiddo, which, like Munist, grew into a wealthy and significant financial hub. Eventually, Munist and Sartanayanin became part of the Republic, and we start to see Munist becoming one of the galaxy's main financial centers. The InterGalactic Banking Clan would be based here, becoming the guarantor and distributor of the Republic's Galactic Credit Standard. In the declining decades of the Republic, the corruption within the Banking Clan remained unchecked. The Trade Federation and many other corporations were allowed to have their own droids, militarized ships, and things like tanks to protect their land assets, as the Republic was unable to stop crime, and so they invested heavily in things like the Snail Tank and Hailfire droids, using them to ensure that their customers did not default on their loans. There were many colonies and factories that were all started with IGBC loans that would be repossessed with deadly force during this era. Before the Clone Wars, San Hill, the chairman of the IGBC, was approached by Count Dooku, who was publicly known to be the leader of the separatist movement. San Hill decided to finance the CIS, believing that they had a strong chance of defeating the Republic. He also used secret banking clan codes, originally meant for transferring bank statements and client deposits, to create the Shadow Feed network. This network was a covert Confederate version of the HoloNet, used to spread propaganda and allow Confederate leaders to send secure, untraceable messages to their subordinates, making the banking clan an essential part of the Confederacy in not just credits, but even in crucial logistics and communications aspects. Something most people are completely unaware of. But true to their strategy of supporting both sides, Munist provided backing to both the Republic and CIS during the Clone Wars. One very rare misstep, and something that was opposed by the local Muuns, was the construction of droid factories and munitions depots on Munist. This forced the Republic to invade this financial hub and dismantle these Confederate facilities, sparking a series of destructive battles throughout the capital. In 22 BBY, during the Battle of Munist, Republic forces led by Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Volvith Mon managed to reclaim the planet. However, this victory came at a high cost, as the battle left the city in ruins and pushed the galaxy closer to financial collapse. The need to get more loans to support the war would be a common source of tension throughout the Senate.
Bankruptcy is not necessary, my friends. If we pass Senator Sam's bill to open new lines of credit, we will gain access to the needed funds.
Won't this bill essentially deregulate the banks?
Though it's interesting not to map on our real-world fiat version of this, where the Federal Reserve admits to just creating numbers on a digital ledger, again this was all backed by precious metals. Material moved to support thousands of different companies across the galaxy to keep this war going, to provide everything from MREs to capital ships. But of course that shouldn't remove the real-world connection to the financial incentives being perhaps the main motivator of these wars. and that it's things like the weapon manufacturers like Kuat Drive Yards, and the IGBC and I guess Palpatine who are the only real winners in this war. Although Emperor Palpatine had little regard for non-humans, the mineral wealth of Munist was crucial for maintaining the stability of the Imperial credit. And of course his own master was a Muun. He knew more than perhaps anyone else in the galaxy just how capable these people were, and so he didn't dare to do a complete takeover of the banks, but he would impose strict decrees and stationed Imperial monitors throughout Munland's financial institutions, and tried to get as many eyes as he could into their business operations. But the Muuns were pragmatic under the Empire, just as it had worked with the Republic and Confederacy. It chose not to oppose Imperial power, understanding that whichever side emerged victorious in the Galactic Civil War, it would still need to do business with the Muuns and the IGBC. During the era of the New Republic, they would stay under the protection of the Imperial Remnant, guarded by a pair of Golan 3 battle platforms. True to their reputation for adaptability, Munist would become the guarantor of the New Republic credit, frustrating the Moffs who could not challenge the IGPC without risking the collapse of their Imperial credit. During the Yuzan Vong War, the Imperial Remnant came under attack and Munist's defenses were overwhelmed in a coordinated strike. The intergalactic alien invaders, who for all we know had run-ins with the Muuns before, outside the galaxy, they would bombard the planet from orbit, turning it into a wasteland and taking any survivors as slaves, having a civilization that was beyond the conceptions of finances. By 40 ABY, however, long after the Vong had been defeated, Munist had managed to recover, and we can only assume that they were coldly and logically plotting to take over the galaxy once more. So that's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, we first learned that Munist was the financial hub in Timothy Zahn's 1997 novel, Spectre of the Past. And although Sandhill species was not named in Episode 2, or its novelization, or the many related reference books, it was first identified as a Muun in the article Galactic Power Brokers, published in the 10th issue of Star Wars Gamer magazine in May 2002. There's really fun speculation on two prior expanded universe stories included characters that could be interpreted as Muuns. One example is from the animated segment of the Star Wars Holiday Special, which shows two unnamed characters on Pana, which do resemble Muuns. Leland Shee confirmed that these characters could be Muuns, and another possible Muun is Lord Greymon, described as, quote, a lean man wearing a traditional Munilinsti banker shawl and pendant. It was mentioned in the Star Wars The Hand of Thrawn duology. And there's a funny error in the Star Wars Empire at War Forces of Corruption, where Muuns are incorrectly depicted as looking identical to humans on the loading screens. That's it for the breakdown. Again, if you made it this far, can you please hit that like button? It really helps me out. Subscribe to see more, check out these other videos, but most important of all, remember, there's no such thing as aliens controlling your leaders. They're choosing to cooperate. And the Force will be with you. Always.